morning. ¿Y hablamos por este orden? ¿Hablamos por este orden?
O sea, tú empiezas a hablar porque eres la maestra de ceremonias, lo das la bienvenida.
Morning, everybody, and thanks
Buenos días a
for
todos.
being
Muchas
here
gracias por
in
estar
Madrid.
aquí en Madrid.
It is with great pleasure that
Para mí es un placer
Fatih Birol, the Executive Director of the
contar
International
con
Energy
Fatih Birol,
Agency, and
secretario
myself,
general de la Agencia Internacional de la
welcome you
Energía,
in Madrid.
y les damos la bienvenida a ambos a
I'm going
Madrid.
to switch
Y ahora,
into
si les
Spanish
parece, voy a hablar español, dice la
for a while.
vicepresidenta.
Muchas gracias y bienvenidos a todos a la ciudad de Madrid, donde esperamos poder seguir trabajando en un debate fundamental de cara al éxito del trabajo multilateral. Problemas globales necesitan foros de gobernanza globales, multilaterales, en los que la convicción de trabajar por la acción climática forma parte de la convicción de las sociedades por la mejora de la convivencia, la lucha por los derechos humanos, por la prosperidad. Y una de las dimensiones importantes vinculadas a la acción climática consiste precisamente en la manera en la que el acceso a energía limpia, a precios asequibles, segura, es compatible con la seguridad climática. La forma en la que transformamos el modo en el que producimos y consumimos energía. Por eso, en esta sesión, queremos escuchar, en primer lugar, al que será el presidente de la Conferencia de las Partes número 28 de la Convención de Naciones Unidas, Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas de Lucha contra el Cambio Climático, el doctor Sultan bin Ahmed Al-Jaber, ministro de Industria y Tecnología de Emiratos Árabes, que será quien nos facilite los acuerdos, el éxito de esta COP. Sin más preámbulos, les invito a escuchar sus palabras.
Excellencies, friends, I'm pleased to join you for this
No
International
se oye el
Climate and Energy Summit.
micrófono, por favor, para el
And I
vídeo.
thank the government of Spain and the International Energy Agency for bringing us together. You meet in Madrid to strengthen the coalition to respond to a defining challenge of our times, saving
hacer frente
the
a los
1.5-degree
desafíos
limit
de nuestro
by
tiempo.
cleaning up global energy.
Para ello,
Time is short,
me
but
estoy
it is
oyendo, lo
possible.
siento.
The International Energy Agency's new net zero roadmap shows us that. But we need action now. First, action at COP28. I urge you to work together in Madrid and in the UAE to secure a strong outcome in response to the global stocktake. That must include commitments to double energy efficiency, triple renewables capacity, cut methane from the energy sector by 75%, and ensure universal access to energy, all by 2030. These efforts must be accompanied by a collective commitment to accelerate a fair and just phase-out of fossil fuels as we bring clean power to all. One without the other equals failure. Second, action from governments. I have proposed an acceleration agenda. This calls on governments to speed up net zero timelines so that developed countries get there as close as possible to 2040 and emerging economies as close as possible to 2050. And it urges all governments to put in place credible actions, policies and plans that are compatible with 1.5-degree world and for developed countries to deliver climate justice to those on the front lines of the crisis. That includes, amongst other measures, putting a stop to new coal and phasing out existing coal, shifting subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables, subsidies the IMF estimates reached $7 trillion last year, and ending new oil and gas licensing. Developed countries must honor the $100 billion commitment and replenish the Green Climate Fund, and we must push the multilateral development banks to adapt their business models to leverage far more private finance at reasonable cost to developing countries so they can reduce emissions and adapt. Third, we need action from business. The acceleration agenda calls on companies, including fossil fuel companies, to create credible transition plans across the entire value chain. All this is eminently achievable. The Climate Ambition Summit I hosted in New York last month indicated a collective way forward. And it showed that action to meet the 1.5-degree limit is not a dream. It is practical and it is possible. We know what needs to be done. Let's do it. I wish you the very best for your discussions today, and I thank you.
Sultan
Bueno,
Al-Jaber
obviamente
realized,
no era sultán,
but
como han visto.
we have the great pleasure to count
pero
on this message,
tenemos un
recorded
gran
message
placer que es el de haber
from the Secretary General
escuchado
of the United
este mensaje
Nations.
grabado del secretario general de las
And
Naciones
now
Unidas.
I hope we
Ahora
can
espero
count on the video
que
from
podamos
video message from
ver
Dr.
y
Sultan
escuchar
Al-Jaber,
el video
incoming
mensaje del
president of the COP.
doctor Sultan Al-Jaber.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Allow me first to thank my dear friends Teresa Ribera and Fatih Birol for inviting me to talk to you today. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person because I am addressing the energy industry on the very issues you are discussing today in Madrid. There are only 59 days to COP28. The global stocktake has confirmed what we already know. The world is not on track to keep 1.5 within reach. The numbers are straightforward. We need to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 22 gigatons in the next 7 years. This is going to require unity and solidarity on a global scale. Every stakeholder, every industry, every segment of society working together. COP28 is focused on action, inclusivity, results, and delivering against a comprehensive agenda. And it is an agenda that was informed by feedback I received from many of you and supported by the great work of the IAEA. Excellencies, the COP28 agenda is centered around fast-tracking a just and equitable energy transition, fixing climate finance, focusing on people, lives, and livelihoods, and underpinned by full inclusivity. We are calling on governments to commit to the goal of tripling renewable energy capacity to 11,000 gigawatt and doubling energy efficiency by 2030. This goal is gathering real momentum. We have support from the EU presidency, from Kenya, the African Union Commission, and most recently, the G20. To enable this goal, countries need to look at practical actions like accelerating permitting and investing in upgrading power grids. They also need to send strong demand signals that incentivize the private sector. And as we build an energy system free of all unabated fossil fuels, including coal, we must rapidly and comprehensively decarbonize the energies we use today. That's why I have called on the oil and gas industry to step up, eliminate methane emissions by 2030, and demonstrate clear net zero pathways by or before 2050. To date, I am proud to announce that we have over 20 oil and gas companies, including NOCs and IOCs, that have committed to COP28's decarbonization targets. Your Excellencies, with only 8 weeks left, I call on you to support the entire agenda of COP28. I invite you to actively participate in this coalition that will help decarbonize the energy system of today and help build the new energy system of the future. I thank you again, and I wish you all a productive meeting, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And
Muchas gracias.
Dear Fatih, that now it is our turn.
Bueno, pues creo que ahora nos toca a nosotros,
We
estimado
can
Fatih.
share what we expect.
Si
and why
le
we are
parece, podemos
meeting today in
compartir
Madrid.
con los demás cuáles son nuestras expectativas y por qué nos reunimos hoy en Madrid.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Buenos días, señoras
It's
y
a great
señores.
pleasure to be
Para mí
here.
es un placer estar
And many
aquí
thanks
con
to you,
ustedes.
Teresa, for
Quiero darle
jointly
las gracias a
organizing
Teresa, en primer
this
lugar, por haber
wonderful event.
organizado con nosotros
And
este
it was
evento
not
maravilloso.
an easy task.
No fue una
You have a
tarea
lot of
fácil.
things to do, but in the middle of
Había muchas cosas que
so
hacer.
many issues, finding time and
Y
supporting
no era
us
fácil porque había
to
que
bring
buscar
so many
tiempo y
distinguished
ayudar.
colleagues across the world is very important. Very many thanks for your leadership here. So, dear colleagues, I wanted to today share with you two things. One, as Secretary General Guterres mentioned, as some of you know, only a few days ago, we published a net zero roadmap. What do we need to do in order to bring the global energy sector in line with the Paris agreements? And second, I would like to share some thoughts. How do we consider, from IAEA perspective, COP28 being successful? What conditions need to be fulfilled from IAEA perspective to consider COP28 is a successful outcome? Now, many of you know that more than 2 years ago, we made a first report, Net Zero 2050, 1.5 degrees, what needs to happen. And in a very short period of time, it became a benchmark for the energy industry, for governments, for investors, in order to look at their future steps. But within the last 2.5 years, many things happened. We had a global energy crisis, we had COVID and others. So we thought there is a need to make an update and to come up with some clear conclusions where we are here, especially before the COP28 meeting, which is crucial for all of us. And this report is on your table, and I am very fortunate to have my colleague Lara Cosi, who co-directed this report, and two of the key authors, Araceli Fernandez and Thomas Spencer, with us here today. So, what happened in the last 2.5 years? First of all, some bad things happened. Namely, last July and August, we have seen perhaps the hottest in the history, and it looks like that this year, 2023, will be the hottest year ever we have recorded. So these are some impacts, and the emissions remained stubborn, still very high, global emissions. At the same time, we have seen some good developments. I will give you 3 of them, which are encouraging, and in my view, they keep the path to 1.5 degree Paris target still within reach, within open. First one, solar is the name of the game. There was years and years, the colleagues who dealt with the energy sector know very well, coal was called king coal. And now solar is the new king of the power sector. This year, of all the power plants installed in the world, more than 80% is renewables, and the rest everything else put together. And solar is the main driver here. So this is very important for the decarbonization of the power sector. It's number one. Number two, and another emitting sector, transportation. We are seeing an unprecedented electrification of the transportation sector. 2 years ago, only 2 years ago, 1 out of 25 cars sold in the world was electric. So 1 out of 25 2 years ago. And this year, it is 1 out of 5 cars sold is electric. So think about and it's not happening in Europe only. It is Europe, China. China is the leader, United States, and elsewhere. So this is the second good news. Third, and for me the most important one, is that in the last 2 years, global clean energy investments increased by 40%, 40%. This is coming from China, United States, driven by the Inflation Reduction Act, Europe, Indonesia, India, and elsewhere, 40%. And this year, which means the global energy investments around the world this year reaches 2.8 trillion, 1.8 for clean, and 1 for fossil fuels. So this is something to take note of. Of course, this is not enough to reach our targets, but there is a strong growth. Now, before going to what we want to see in COP28, I want to share with you one very important analysis coming from IAEA and its complications, its consequences. Namely, dear colleagues, even if there is no single new clean energy policy added in the next years to come, even there is no climate agreement in COP or somewhere else, looking at the market fundamentals, coal, oil, and natural gas consumption globally will peak before 2030. They will not decline immediately, but they are going to peak before 2030 as a result of what is happening in the technologies, in the markets, and the economic growth prospects of key fossil fuel importers. This is important for the following reason. If it is not a growing business, you are, and if you consider to make a large-scale fossil fuel investment, it is not only posing a risk for the climate, it poses also a business risk. So this will be a major issue in our World Energy Outlook coming this October, third week of October. We are going to show the world, investors, even there are no new policies, climate policies, clean energy policies are pushed, we will see fossil fuel peak will be before the end of this decade. Would it be enough to reach our climate goals? No. Without additional policies, we will have a temperature increase 2.4 degrees Celsius, still much higher than 1.5 that we want to reach. But this is important from a business perspective, that we are going to tell the business leaders and investors, put the business risk on the table. It's up to them to take that risk or not, of course. Now, coming back to our suggestions for COP. We are fortunate enough that Dr. Sultan Al-Jabbar and myself are organizing a series of high-level dialogues with many stakeholders in different locations to hear their views, their preoccupations, their perspectives. We had one in India in the back-to-back to G20 meeting, one in Nairobi in the African Climate Summit, and one in New York only a few weeks ago in the margins of the UN General Assembly. Discussing with these colleagues, hearing what the different countries' perspectives are, among many other conditions we have to reach 1.5, we have 5 conditions we thought would qualify COP28 being a successful one, which we very much want to see and supporting the COP28 presidency. And they are coming from our work, as I said, in our net zero roadmap. What are those? First, we would like to see the countries in Dubai agree and set a policy goal of tripling the global capacity of renewables. That's number one. Number two, we would like countries to support the doubling of energy efficiency improvements globally. Number three, we would like to see that there is a strong commitment of the decline of fossil fuel use started with coal and new coal power plants built. Fourth, we would like to see that there is a mechanism in place and working to support the clean energy financing in emerging countries. There is a lot of momentum here. We saw in the climate summit of President Macron and other initiatives. We have especially worried about the financing of clean cooking in developing countries. So this is the fourth is the financing of clean energy. And fifth is we would like to see a commitment, a credible commitment from oil and gas industry that their actions are in line with the Paris goals. This is from the oil and gas industry. So these are the 5 conditions we as IAEA would look into and see whether or not they will be in the final outcomes. And of course, to finish, there are many challenges to reach those commitments, and there are many challenges to reach 1.5. But I want to pick up one which I believe is the key, which is the geopolitical fragmentation of the world we are in now. This is creating a key impediment for some of the steps we are hoping to take. We are seeing that in the technology area, in the clean energy technologies, there is already a very strong growth, but the lack of international cooperation is a major, major problem. We have to find a way to isolate these geopolitical tensions among the countries and focus on this issue, the countries coming together and trying to have a positive, constructive agenda before COP28. And as such, I am very happy, Teresa, that you were able to bring so many countries around the world, hopefully to support the international collaboration on this very important topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fatih. Thank you so much for your introductory comments and for the very good work that you have been developing with your team. So to be able to introduce this idea of net zero being updated after so many things happening around the world. This is part of the exercise that we need to bring into reality in a joint manner. The different countries, the different governments, the different corporates, the different financial institutions working towards a much more secure and decarbonized world, towards an energy system that provides what human beings and industrial requirements demand, but at the same time that ensure that things happen in a smooth manner and in a context where climate security is ensured. I would like to make a couple of introductory comments before hearing our special guest coming from the civil society to introduce their own ideas on what they could be expecting from governments in the COP and what a reference in the international economic press could be taken into consideration, so to say, if this is working or if this is not working as we should be expecting to work. Before that, I would like, as I said, to share some comments with you. My first message is that I think that something which is very important to take into consideration is that a global problem deserves a global response. So multilateralism being the way to respond to the current challenges is a key issue in this COP. We are supposed to assess whether we are aligned or not to fulfill the Paris Agreement goals. And probably what we have already read, what we already know, shows that we are not aligned to Paris Agreement goals, so to ensure that the 1.5 global goal is sufficiently secure for the time to be. But we cannot stop there. We need to provide in the formal way that the COPs do express themselves how we can ensure that we become aligned. This is quite an important task for the presidency, but in a party-driven process, as it is the United Nations processes, we all need to provide inputs and to facilitate solutions. This is why I think that we have to build on this very good news coming from the International Energy Agency, from different corporates, from different governments making their best to provide solutions to the climate challenge, including those dealing with the energy sector. This is why we need to anticipate this conversation, and along the lines that in this series of conversations that you have been handling during the last months, we have a great opportunity to exchange views on how we want to reflect the way we can accelerate our decarbonization, how the energy sector can provide key references in this context, and how and what messages we want to capture in these formal decisions to be taken during the COP. The second message is that much of this exercise we already know. There has been a long time since we identified that probably it would be good to be smart in the use of energy, so providing energy efficiency, energy savings was a good piece of recommendation, as it was also the case in the electrification of final uses wherever it was possible, because we had some advantages on how to produce electricity without creating emissions, without raising emissions. This is why probably you identify that these positive global goals dealing with renewable energy, with improving efficiency, can attract investment, can attract the interest of the different communities all over the world. We also know that there may be some final uses of energy that are difficult to be electrified. So we are still thinking how we can build the solutions to provide the proper response to these difficulties to electrify final uses of energy. And still, we have much to do. But we have some references that we are thinking about. We have some cooperative moods to provide responses. So we have also learned that along the lines of these very primary needs, there are some instrumental things that need to be aligned with these goals? What about the finance? What about the risk in the investments? What are the specific concerns and specific needs in the different continents, in the different national realities? You have also provided some clues on these issues. What about the skills? The type of labor skills, human skills that we need in a different world. Are we prepared to provide the right answers? What about the grids? If we are to provide much more electricity for final uses, what type of grids? Secure grids. How we can introduce the digitalization to ensure the smartest possible way to provide energy for final consumers. But then the raw materials you were discussing last week in Paris. What new raw materials we could be using and how we can ensure that they are available with the affordability, not only in terms of money, in terms of cost, but also how we obtain these raw materials and how we provide prosperity for those areas where these raw materials come from. What about the supply chain of these raw materials, but also the equipments that we could be using? How we can organize all these elements so to ensure that we can fulfill our goals. The main question in this conversation is what of all of these different issues need to be reflected in the COP decisions, in the formal way to express as international community when dealing with climate, and very much in particular in this fora, what are the recommendations, the understandings of the energy needs and concerns. Do we talk about global goals as suggested by the International Energy Agency? Do we remind ourselves what we think about peaking emissions or the reduction of global emissions by 2030, updating the information according to what it was agreed in Paris, but what it is also shown in the IPCC reports? Do we talk about how we can combine a shift in the demand of energy to ensure that the offer of fossil fuels do change? So what about the fossil fuel production, the emissions related to this fossil fuel production and consumption? These are the type of things that we could be discussing during the COP. But it is good to have the opportunity to ensure that we have understood where the concerns may be in different countries, in different constituencies, what type of proposals and what type of language we can introduce in this conversation, what type of action in the capitals, in the boards, do match the ambition that we require, or the response for the transformation, for the transition in our systems and in our companies. I think that this could be probably challenging, but we have the opportunity to anticipate these conversations and to ensure that we understand each other, so to be able to deliver a positive and consistent outcome from this COP. And this was why we thought that it was good to hear to different constituencies in this meeting, to have this open exchange in the very first session in the morning, to hear what the industry, the energy sector, the youth think about all these question marks. And this is why we organized this first session, taking into consideration all the different views and ensuring that we can hear your views and have a preliminary exchange with you all on these issues. So, if you're okay, we can invite them to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Teresa, once again for this great meeting. Now, we would like to go through a few colleagues to start, as Madam Vice President mentioned, to set the scene. We start with Catherine Abreu, who is a director, Destination Zero, and we had meetings last Friday here, and she is the rapporteur of the civil society groups who met on Friday in Madrid. Over to you, please.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, Madam Vice President, Executive Director Burrell. Thank you for hosting this event. As I begin, I'd like to actually ask all of you in the room to just think about the climate emergency that's currently unfolding in your home. And sadly, I know that we'll all have something to think about because the consequences of climate change are upon us everywhere, every day at this point. I come from Canada, where devastating wildfires have consumed almost 20 million hectares of forest this summer. Nova Scotia, the province that my Canadian family calls home, has declared states of emergency 4 times in the last 12 months. First for Hurricane Fiona, then for extreme temperature weather variations, then for the fires, then for the floods. I know we all feel the pain and grief of this loss, of the ways the places that we love are threatened, the ways that the people we love are threatened. And I know that we feel that because all of us are here to build this grand coalition to keep 1.5 alive. And the truth is, we know 1.5 is achievable with current technologies, but will remain out of reach if we stick to current policies. The global stocktake has made it clear that there is a gap between the stated ambition of parties to the Paris Agreement and action on the ground, and has explicitly pointed to ongoing failure of policy to drive the energy transition as being largely responsible for that gap. We cannot bear one more year of this failure. I'm here today to share a summary of the civil society roundtable that took place this Friday as you prepared to travel here for your meetings. And our message to you is pretty clear. COP28 will be judged on its ability to deliver a global agreement on a package of energy transition goals that are based around these 5 pillars. First, a determined farewell to fossil fuels. Renewable energy is the glimmer of hope, keeping the window to 1.5 open, and fossil fuels is what is closing it. The IAEA report has once again told us that a world moving to net zero emissions by mid-century has no room for new coal, oil, or gas projects. And yet, many of your governments are still approving those new projects. As we heard leader after leader say last week at the Climate Ambition Summit that the UN Secretary General hosted in New York, which is sadly now underwater, the climate crisis is a fossil fuel crisis. Fossil fuel dependence is not only responsible for the climate emergency, it is a threat to public health. It is one of the underlying causes of the cost of living crisis that many of us are struggling with. It is also a driver of conflicts and wars. In this context, every new investment in fossil fuels, every new fossil fuel project is a choice. It is a conscious choice that companies and countries are making for our collective devastation. An immediate halt to all new fossil fuel projects is non-negotiable. We need a global signal sent to governments that it's time for us to rein in the fossil fuel industry and focus on building strategies for a just and equitable transition away from dependence on coal, oil, and gas. Number 2, empowering renewables and right-sizing energy consumption. We agree with the IEA's mission and suggestions for COP28 to triple renewables by 2030, double energy intensity improvements from 2020 levels, double electrification, and cut methane emissions by at least 3/4. These 4 pillars must be central to the COP text. We also must acknowledge that investing in grids is essential to make this a possibility, and that we are pulling these renewables in, not simply to add to the growing energy mix, but to replace fossil fuels. Governments must get deeply involved in developing the policies that will enable energy-efficient systems run on renewables to remove fossil fuel use. And this change cannot be derailed and watered down by reliance on technologies that are underproven, such as CCS technologies, or in sources that are underperforming, such as nuclear and hydrogen. 3, centering global equity and justice for workers and communities. I think we all know that transitions away from fossil fuel dependence toward renewable energy must be embedded in equity and justice. Global commitments that focus on phasing out one fossil fuel over another because of some countries' comfort levels is not going to cut it. And it will undermine the global momentum that we need all of you to be working to foster. Rich developed countries should be moving first and fastest in this transition. Instead, these countries are often the worst culprits for fossil fuel expansion. We know that renewable energy can enable affordable energy access for all with adequate planning and finance. Energy policies should be enabling people-centered development and ensuring that communities, in particular those communities that have been left out of the existing energy system and borne the most disproportionate impacts of existing energy systems, should be directly benefiting from this transition to renewable energy. In my part of the world, we can see that Indigenous communities in particular are really leading the charge on renewable energy, and that's a story that our energy policies should be working to continue. Policies need to be protecting biodiversity and natural ecosystems. Let us see the end of the fossil fuel era as an opportunity to also end the era of harmful, reckless resource extraction. There's no climate justice without human rights, and energy deployment and fossil fuel phase-out must respect fundamental human rights, including the rights of Indigenous peoples. 4, we have to mobilize adequate finance flows. We know that finance is the lifeblood of this transition, especially into developing countries. The Nairobi Declaration, signed at the Africa Climate Summit, made a bold call that we all must heed to mobilize the scale of finance and undertake the macroeconomic transformations that's required to get this job done. The need to immediately halt fossil fuel subsidies, I think, is pretty obvious to all of us. We can't get embedded into the solutions as long as we keep pumping public dollars into the problem to the tune of $13 million a minute, as calculated by the IMF. And we need that strong injection of about $1 trillion a year into public finance to fuel the transition. Finally, 5, strong governance, accountability, and global agreements. These global goals are required to send the right signals back into countries to own the energy transition and prepare for the inevitable phase-out of fossil fuels. Governments at all levels need to actively orchestrate the phase-out and ensure that market forces do not derail the transition. The market will not take care of this by itself. This year must send a signal to get fossil fuels out of the way of the clean energy transition. We can plainly see at this point that pro-fossil fuel policy inertia, anti-climate lobbying, greenwashing, and political corruption are key barriers holding this transition back. The world is watching, and any disconnect between the stated ambitions and ground realities erodes the credibility of governments and international processes. The adoption of global energy transition goals and joining initiatives like the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance and the Powering Past Coal Alliance are crucial to sending unambiguous signals to countries and investors, and to maintaining trust in the global process. International cooperation is essential to accelerating the pace and lowering the costs of this transition. We must be unequivocal. There is no such thing as a climate-friendly fossil fuel. There is no such thing as an efficient fossil fuel subsidy. Curbing overconsumption, blocking constructions of new coal, oil, and gas projects, and ensuring no allowance for escape hatches that extend the life of fossil fuels are integral components to a strong and resolute climate action strategy. So, as I conclude, I want to reiterate our expectations for COP28, a global agreement on a package that both phases in renewable energy and energy efficiency in order to phase out fossil fuels. These two things cannot be separated from each other. Civil society of all stripes are here to help. I'm reporting from just one group of countless groups on the ground at home in your countries who stand ready to implement this transition and, yes, to hold you accountable. We know what needs to be done. The writing is on the wall. We call on you to have the courage to act with conviction and finally tackle the root cause of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Abreu. I think it is important that you highlighted, on one hand, renewables and efficiency need to get a push, but simultaneously, we have to make sure that the fossil fuel sees a decline, and this transition should be a just one for all. Now, as I mentioned, last Friday, there was a meeting of the civil society groups, and we were fortunate to hear from Mrs. Abreu as a representative of the civil society groups. At the same time, on Friday again, there was an industry group who came together to discuss from the industry perspective, organized by the Spanish Energy Club. And here we are fortunate to have Mrs. Paulina Beato to tell us what the industry thought about this. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here as a voice of the European industry. In the meeting, they highlight 10 points. First, the industrial commitment to the energy transition as a key vector against the climate change. Second, an urgent call for global collective action. Third, a challenge that needs to be worked, but on when the representatives make a commitment. The commitment and collective action. Energy transition is a key vector against climate change because energy is one of the fundamental pillars of the well-being of the society, and at the same time has a fundamental role to face the enormous challenge of climate change. However, the energy transition solutions must be compatible with the security of supply, affordability, and accessibility, but also with the competitiveness of the economy. The industry is fully committed to work and actively contribute with its action, knowledge, and experience to meet the objective of the Paris Agreement. At the same time, they make an urgent call for global collective action, because while we know that we are far from achieving climate objectives, it is crucial to make implementation. And it's essential that all countries, regions, join with commitment and decisive climate action. And now the most difficult part, they challenge and barriers. First, decisive boost for all renewable energy. In particular, the tripling capacity of renewable energy by 2030. Needed action are coordinated policies that facilitate investment and the development of supply chains, elements such as storage, hybridization, and demand flexibility, proper functioning of energy market, and cooperation to ensure supply chains and access to critical minerals. The second point, the second challenge, was infrastructure development. Needed action were acceleration of permitting and social acceptance. Third, energy efficiency and transformation of the industrial energy demand. In particular, doubling effort in reducing energy intensity. Needed action are establishing the principle of energy efficiency at the center of all decision-making. Recognize the growing importance of consuming behavior. Promote circular economy and promote the transformation of energy demand. The fourth point was contribution of all technologies to attend the energy trilemma. Needed action were counting with all supply and demand technologies, both existing and future, that contribute to the energy trilemma. Technologies that are still in early stage might need more incentive, more support, and more enable tools. Fifth, promoting innovation, industrialization, and competitiveness. Needed action are clear signal to industry to accompany the decarbonization process, and a level playing field with common and balanced rules between countries and regions to avoid unfair competition. 6, alliance for working together. I would like to say that collaboration was one of the most repeated words. Collaboration between all agents to accelerate decarbonization, reduce cost, and promote competitiveness. They told also about collaborative platform as a good practice where stakeholders may focus on solving specific challenges. For sure, 7 was improving access to finance. In particular, unlock the necessary economic funds toward mitigation and adaptation to climate change, but also speeding up formulas to support the least developed country, the most disadvantaged region, and the most vulnerable group. Finally, they pointed out people protagonists of change. Needed action are ensuring citizen involvement, mechanisms for greater transparency, communication, and job creation. In summary, cooperation, financing, and implementation for investment and infrastructure is a nice summary. But also, the feeling that a just and fair energy transition is a great opportunity to leave a sustainable planet for present and future generations, to promote solidarity and value creation for the societies, and to construct a more sustainable and enduring global economy. In my view, it deserves to work ahead and to put figure to all commitment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Beato. As I said, last Friday, there was an industry group, several leaders of the Spanish and European industry and the civil society. We heard from both of them. And for the European industry, if I may, competitiveness is very important, of course, but the next industrial age is the clean energy technology manufacturing, and we all hope that Europe takes a good position in terms of the batteries, electric cars, solar panels, windmills, electrolyzers. I am sure it was a good discussion on that. Now, many people compare the COP28 with the Paris Agreement. It is as important, as many say, as the Paris Agreement. We had Paris COP in 2015. So we are very fortunate to have Laurence Tubiana, who is the architect of Paris Agreement and at the same time CEO of European Climate Foundation. Over to you, Laurence.
Thank you, dear Fatih. Thank you, Teresa, for inviting us and me. I'll try to be short because so many things have been said already. And trying to, in a way, represent the spirit of Paris Agreement and how the COP28 has hopefully to maintain that spirit. We can maintain the letter, we can maintain the procedures, we can maintain even the, all the processes and lose totally the Paris Agreement spirit. So it's a very important moment, in my view, as you said, Fatih, that because, of course, that's a moment where, for the first time since the signature and the ratification, it's a crucial moment of the global stocktake, and the moment where we will implement the ratcheting up mechanism that is at the core, the top-down element of the Paris Agreement. Everyone can, of course, decide on its own strategy of decarbonization, but the moment where we gather all together and we decide that we are trustful with the global goal of Paris, and in particular, keeping alive the 1.5, is this moment. So it is, we cannot highlight enough the importance of this COP. I know it's a huge responsibility of our friends of United Arab Emirates, but that's true that we need a strong decision, as was said before by Kat and others, and by Teresa in the beginning, because the Global Stocktake report will, of course, make clear what we are not on track, we are maybe potentially off track, but that we have all the resources to do well. So it's a moment where not only we have to look at what has been in the past, but then design the action plan to really, in a way, make sure that we are delivering the result we need, the next round of the national determined contribution, and the innovation that we have to bring in that process. Just again, not repeating the processes, but really reviving and consolidating the Paris spirit. The good thing is, as you said, and thank you for IAEA to be the, the keeper of the spirit, because you are doing that. And the net zero roadmap is really the way where we see it's possible, but we have to be super serious and not play with words or vague commitments, or we will see afterwards how we do that in 2050. So that's very, very important, and I cannot but really highlight the enormous roles that IAEA, under your leadership, Fatih, has been really giving us the roadmap to get there. So we cannot ignore that. So technical feasibility of the phasing out of fossil fuel has been confirmed. It's important, because at the same time, so many times we say it's not possible. And that's exactly the proof of the concept. I was struck reading the report that 2 years ago, your assumption was only 50% of the technology were available. And now we have jumped, and we are now knowing that we have more than 50%, 75% almost ready. So it's really a moment where, together with the industry and together with many other actors, we have to deliver. So I think, as many of you have said, and Kat Abru in particular, but as well you and Teresa, we have to be serious about the details of the transition. We cannot just have targets, we have to know how we get there. And how to get there is a phase out, the orderly transition, phasing out fossil fuels. Of course, there is an issue about we will be discussing COP28, or how we have the solution, how we abate, how much we can abate the emissions of the fossil fuel sector, the coal, the oil, and the gas. But we should not fool ourselves, and that's very clear in the report as well. There is not an infinite capacity to store, sequester, and to store carbon. That's not true. That's just not true. Scientifically, we know that's not true. I was really shocked by that. A very important CEO of a very bright oil company saying, now that we master direct air capture of CO2, we can continue the business as usual. Just crazy. Not meaning, we have again come back to the science and come back to the very good scenarios that are in this report. So I have two demands for our collective, and again, trying to be not only the ghost of the Paris Agreement, but really somebody checking every day if we are going well. And I think we have to be serious on finance. That will be the precondition of every discussion at this COP and beyond that. Of course, we know, and you, Madam, has said how much you need investment on the industry side. And we know, for example, in Europe, the problem we are facing, including on the investment in wind industry. We cannot, and thanks to Fatih and the European Central Bank and the EIB, we had a very daunting assessment on Friday, just to see that people are not conscious sometimes in the financial sector that it's not the moment to say, look, oh, you know, interest rates are high, we cannot do anything about that, so you should, wind industry is not competitive nowadays. It's just crazy. We need really to maintain the line that we have to invest for the long term. And even Christine Lagarde, which normally is not, you know, the one who should say that, she said, privileging the short term is really a danger for the macroeconomic stability in the long term. And she was very, very clear, as well as the EIB head. And so that was a very important conversation as well. So finance is the lifeblood. We have, of course, to deliver on our commitments on the 100 billion. Yes, because if not, the discussion is impossible. We have to reduce the cost of capital in emerging markets and developing countries. But at the same time, and we need a systemic reform. I had different evaluation of the Sharm el-Sheikh meeting last year, but the good thing, one of the very good things, was the reform of the international financial architecture. So we have to double down on that, and we are lagging behind what we should have been done this year. The Paris summit was useful, but really we should be, before the COP28, the very good signals of we are really implementing this reform. On top of that, we need new international financial resources. There is no miracle. There is no fiscal space for many countries, including on the G7, that could, by miracle, add more. And because of course, of the invasion from Russia in Ukraine. So we need taxation on polluting activities. We need taxation on a number of global flows, because if not, there is, again, no miracle. We need the public funding, the taxpayers, including mostly in developed countries, of course, just to put and leverage the private sector we're looking for. Finally, I think the good thing of the Paris Agreement was to call for all stakeholders to contribute to the Paris goal achievement. It has created a vast array of commitments from business, from local authorities, from many, many, many sectors. The financial sector, the industry sector, the region, the state, the municipalities. It's good, interesting, but at the same time, when we saw that in COP26, that was and it will even only grow by chance in COP28, this is at the same time a huge risk of fragmentation. Who understands who it's going on? Who understands if really these commitments are really delivering or not? Who makes the distinction between the really people, the real industry who are delivering and the one who are just greenwashing? So that's why I really call that the next round of national determined contribution, because everything will be about accountability finally. And then I'm calling that local authorities, whether it's region and states, and I hope we'll see that in Dubai, and the companies are going together with their government. They are accountable to each other to say, yes, we have a serious decarbonization plan. We are there, the California states or the Baden-Württemberg state or whatever states, together with the big cities who are really willing to achieve, plus the companies and saying, we are all in together. And that's a condition to revive the center. And not having a fragmentation, not only the geopolitical fragmentation, Fatih, you were referring to, but just the sense of disorder. It's not an orderly transition we are working in because nobody knows where it's going on. And that's why the signals that we are sending to the financial sector, to industry sector, are so messy. So we need consistent policies, but consistent commitment and consistent accountability mechanism. I do think that COP28 can deliver a lot of advancement of that, and I will be very happy to see that. And again, no finger pointing, that's not the problem. We need the multilateral spirit, but we know that the demand for oil, coal, and gas has to peak this decade before, and that we need to be very clear about the capacity of maintaining oil and gas and coal for the period, but at the same time really being serious about the capacity of abatement. So again, the spirit is still there, but it is really in danger, and we could really destroy a considerable achievement that was really bringing all countries together. And I think this group can bridge the difference between many of the developing countries on one side, the developing one, and sharing just the rational response to the crisis. Because again, it's not about, it's just so dangerous that we should all wake up to say that's the moment to work again much more together and not fight against each other that we have seen in so many fora for the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurence, for cautiously optimistic messages and answering a lot of questions, including finance and investment. Thank you very much for addressing these issues and answering those questions. But you left us with one question: who is the very important CEO of the very bright oil company? So we are all going to think about this now. Dear colleagues, we have now to finish the first session, we have 3 other interventions. If I may, I would like to suggest them the 3 minutes to finish their intervention. The first one is, as the Vice President mentioned, we wanted to hear the views from the economic journalists, and we have a distinguished representative, Alonso Soto from Bloomberg News. Over to you, sir.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Vice President Rivera, for the invitation. It's great to be here and to be able to give you guys the perspective from the media of what would be a success or a failure in the next conference, the next COP. I first would like to just give you a brief idea of how important the conference is for the media, for us specifically for Bloomberg. In 2019, for the conference that was held here in Madrid, we only had 2 reporters coming and covering the event for the 15 days. For the upcoming one, we plan to send dozens of reporters. We're going to have a TV set. We're going to have the launch of a special Green Magazine edition, and we're going to have a lot of the top editors in our business there. And the reason is not only because of the outcome that will come out of this, but also because of all the business around it, right? We're going to have a lot of the CEOs of major energy companies. We're going to have the CEOs of renewable energy companies. We're going to have investment bankers. And you guys, I think you know better than anybody else that there is a whole ecosystem around these conferences that attracts the attention of investors, and that's something, those are the guys who actually read our news. For these conferences specifically, I think there are some political factors that make it quite important. We're going to have US elections next year. We're going to have European Parliament election next year. And I think that raises a lot of questions in terms of whether the decisions taken later this year, will they be fulfilled or not. In the case of Europe, you see the fast pace of green transition angering a lot of parts of society. You see many people that believe they're losing out, and that can continue to fuel far-right movements that are on the rise here in Europe. The war in Ukraine and the surging consumer prices is not making things any easier. In the United States, you have a similar problem of many people who believe that they're being left out, and that's an issue. So determining the success of the next COP is not easy. It depends on which side you're in. It depends on your level of ambition. What it is clear is that the worst case scenario is a no deal. That means that there will be no action at the national level, no mobilization, and that's a tremendous loss of opportunity for everybody. Expectations also play a big part here. I think that everybody knows already, has been mentioned, that the world is not moving fast enough to cut emissions at the pace promised in Paris. There are already big expectations for an ambitious deal in the next COP. Falling short could be seen as a failure. For the conference to be considered a success, there needs to be a wider compromise that can bring predictability for investors and somewhat meet expectations. At the end of the day, what will be crucial for investors and for watchers is if there is a clear road ahead, a global signal. Now, how can you change, how can you adapt, how can you invest without knowing what will happen? How do you invest and make a safe investment, but a safe investment with a safe and responsible return? A political agreement by some countries and some companies without clear commitments will likely not be enough for watchers to call this a success. Recently, the G20 has been a good example that even against all odds, you can still pull together a compromise, even if it's not liked by everyone. I also believe that a big determinant to the success will also be how much are developing countries included in this. Whether pledges made to the developing world are kept and materialize. For example, when can the loss and damage fund be made operational? How to shape new financial architecture that helps vulnerable countries withstand climate change? Allow them to have ample concessional loans, while at the same time also access to debt markets, and this is very important for investors watching this closely. The last Latin American and European summit held just a couple of months ago was somewhat of a disappointment. And that's because the European nation wanted those countries to move very fast with the green transition. And that's something that at this moment is not in their interest. However, both sides can still take certain steps in the same direction to give a clear signal. I spent most of my career in Latin America and in Africa, and there is a constant fight by developing countries to have a bigger say on issues that affect them. And I think this is where the future is. So with that, I wish you the best of luck in what will be a very important and closely watched COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. We directly go now to Mrs. Maria Manduce, who is the CEO of Women Business Coalition. Maria, over to you, please.
Thank you, Fatih, Teresa, and thank you all, because it's a lot of travel lately. So you probably were in New York last week, now here, and it's tiring, right? And so I know that you're here because you're very committed, and you came here because you want to have a good deal. Because the world is watching you, as Kat has mentioned, and because we don't have the luxury of failure at this COP, because the effects of climate change are so present in your countries that if you go back home and you don't have a good deal, I mean, your people are going to question why you go to COP or why you come to Madrid. So, we're with you. So Women Business was created back 10 years ago. And the idea is to bring the business voice that saw that this is an opportunity. And that's why we mean business. Okay, that climate change is an opportunity to do business for the long-term shared value. Is good for business, good for your employees, good for your clients, good for your financing, etc. And when we started, so you had your inventories, we had the GHG protocol. Thanks to Laurence, Paris Agreement, NDCs, we have the Science-Based Targets Initiative. This initiative is one that companies voluntarily set targets and then are validated, okay? So there is certain assurance that those targets are aligned with science. And who is science for the science-based targets? The IAEA, okay? So that's why this report is so important, because companies are going to set targets that are aligned with this report. We started and there were only a handful of companies. Now there are 13,000 companies. If we're lucky, by the end of the year, we will be close to 20,000. These are companies that have set targets to be aligned with science and to be net zero by 2050, half emissions by 2030, okay? From those, there are 6,000, 7,000 that are big companies. There are other 6,000 that are SMEs that also have, through the SME Climate Hub, their conduit to be net zero. So business wants 1.5 to be within reach because they have set their targets. And last year, when we went to COP, And we saw that there were some doubts about 1.5. We mobilized 200 of them in 2 days because they say enough is enough. If you have agreed to the Paris Agreement, if you have agreed to NDCs, please don't change. We need long-term stability because we, companies, have made our commitments. If you change, then what are we going to do? We have put investments in play aligned with those objectives. We believe that 13,000, 20,000, this is not enough. We need to have millions of companies that are taking action, and that's where you have a key role to play. Because if you put ambitious policies, then we will get to the millions. Okay? So we want you to take confidence that if there are 13,000 companies, 38 trillion market cap, that believe that we can go to net zero, you can put in place ambitious regulations because other companies will follow. And I'll give you afterwards some examples. So we very much welcome the tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, and I would say zero pollution. Okay? Fossil fuel phase out. We are starting a campaign that is called Fossil to Clean, and we are bringing the business voice to ask the different stakeholders on what needs to happen. Because, let me be honest, we've been here in this space for 20 years, right? All of us working. And there's nothing on the cover text that says that we need to stop what is causing climate change. I'm a little bit embarrassed, personally. And I look at you because you do have the pen, I don't. But come on, how can we look at our children and our youth and say, no, we are fighting climate change, but we have not pointed to the cause of climate change on the text? So I really encourage COP28 to be strong and to put this on the text. It might not be phased out, it must be phased down. You can put the words that you want, but we absolutely need to have this text on the treaty. So the business community, what we are asking is that the oil and gas, no new exploration. Fatih says it very clear, Fatih and all the team, wonderful Laura and everybody that is behind. We don't need new oil and gas because the demand is going to decline. Finance sector, you need to shift 4-to-1 from fossil to clean, okay? No new investing in new exploration, obviously, because we don't want to have stranded assets, right? We don't want to pay a society for those. On the demand side, the fossil fuel phase out by 2040, and ask your suppliers to do the same. Now, we know that not all industries will be able to do it, but that shouldn't stop those that can do it to have this commitment. And let me give you a few examples. So Volvo, as we launched the campaign, have said that 2024, no new diesel cars will be sold, and they have advanced the date to 2030 for the phase-out of internal combustion engine. The next week, we had a call from Mercedes saying, well, maybe we should do that, because that's the kind of game that companies play. They like to compete, and they want to be the best. So let's use that to our advantage. A company that I just love, IKEA. So IKEA has decided in the Netherlands to not sell more cook stoves with fossil fuels. They will move to, and apparently it was very difficult, and they want to do this all over the world. So there are these small steps that matter. And then lastly, I didn't mention the electricity, the utilities that obviously are full into the transition, okay? I'm giving you an example of those that have more difficult. Lyonnais Basel, chemical company, they have decided to not sell their refinery, close their refinery. Their emissions are going 40%. And why are they doing that? Because they have a net zero commitment, okay? And those net zero commitment does not only affect the scope 1 and 2 emissions, it also affects the scope 3 emissions, so the suppliers. So you will be pleased to know that the countries that have increased more, the companies, the region that has increased more SBTi, science-based targets, is Southeast Asia. Because the big companies are asking their suppliers to also reduce their emissions. And so that's why the business ambition and commitment, it's unstoppable. So let me conclude. So, yeah, we use a lot the term of courage, right? And so that's, what you need to show. And I would be, listening this afternoon when you have the press conference, and I hope you can manage to say something that brings us a step forward. We don't want to have 190 countries agreeing on fossil fuel phase out. Maybe we should for the COP, but what we need is to have a set of countries that are the coalition of the willing that agree to work with business to go very, very fast. In New York, I had the pleasure to sit with 20% of market cap in the world. So all the big companies in the world, so the Amazon, the Microsoft, that they have a substantial footprint. They wanted to go faster, and we were not putting in place the mechanism for them to go faster. So that's not all the business community, but I like to bring these cases because we tend to think that the business community, when we say greenwashing, well, I mean, let's be very clear about who's greenwashing or not, because the companies with whom we work have validated targets, are very committed, are speaking up, are exiting trade associations where these positions are not being held, etc. So every fraction of degree matters, and every CO2 molecule matters. So we cannot distinguish coal, oil, and gas. We need to phase out all of them. Of course, it will change depending on the country's circumstances. But we have already achieved the coal phase out. All the companies, finance institutions have internalized that. There's no point about talking about that. That has been achieved. Let's move to oil and gas. So business is the catalyst of change. They are the ones making the decisions, the investments, sometimes in very difficult environment. And come on, it cannot be that, having a clean business is more expensive than having one that is not clean. So subsidies, carbon pricing, de-risking some of these investments, interest rates, etc., is fundamental for the scale for tripling renewables. So, yeah, well, we'll be watching you, right? And we are also here to help, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, giving us insights from the business community. Of course, up to now, or until recently, business community stick to climate goals for ethical reasons, but we see that the profitability is becoming an additional factor for many of those. Dear colleagues, to finish this round, we have now two youth delegates for climate, Mrs. Hanna Hoyer and Mr. Askeli Ruvari. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellencies, all distinguished delegates, it is evident that youth are at the forefront of achieving climate justice. In the coming hours today, it is our future that you will be discussing. Our future depends on your courage and ambition here today. My name is Hanna Höjer.
And I am Akseli Rouvari, and we stand here before you as Finland's youth delegate for climate. Today, we will deliver you a speech composed from the positions conducted together by youth delegates all across Europe. And we are thus sharing voices of not only Finnish youth, but also youth in Europe more widely.
This summit seeks to build a broad international coalition that can increase momentum in order to meet the commitments of the Paris Agreement, most notably that famous 1.5 degrees. That is exactly what youth all across Europe, all across the globe, need you to achieve here today. As the largest source of harmful emissions, we demand the energy sector to adopt the role of a leader and step forward with strong policies and tangible actions to drive forward the clean energy transition that the world so direly needs.
This event provides each of you with an opportunity to send a strong signal to the world on our common future, to reiterate the 1.5 degree goal is alive and achievable, and to deliver a firm message to the global stocktake process culminating at COP28 in less than 2 months. We strongly urge you to use this opportunity to be remembered in the future as heroes, not villains.
Let me be clear. There is an absolute need for countries to raise their mitigation ambitions and to deliver on those goals on time. The global stocktake of the Paris Agreement must, in an open and inclusive manner, shed light on the progress made thus far and the progress still needed to achieve the goals in the Paris Agreement regarding emission cuts, adaptation, financing, loss and damage, and among others.
On the other hand, the mitigation work program must be utilized as an arena to discuss sector-specific emission cuts, technology transfer, ambition enhancement, and concrete implementation. Most importantly, The program must start the follow-up of the energy transition decision from Glasgow, which asks the world's countries to accelerate the phase-out of unabated coal power and of inefficient subsidies for fossil fuels.
And more than that, as representatives of the European youth, our united voice demands the world leaders to reach consensus on choosing to completely phase out all fossil fuels instead of merely phasing them down. And thus we urge countries here to expand Glasgow's decision to encompass the oil and gas sector, given the transition away from fossil fuels is inevitable for the required emission reductions.
We ask each of you to advocate for the inclusion of a dedicated agenda item focused on phasing out fossil fuels at COP28. As emphasized by IAEA's roadmap towards net zero, there is no need for investments in new fossil fuel supply. For example, cutting down fully operational nuclear plants and opening new coal-fired power stations, as is happening in some European countries, is like shooting ourselves in the leg.
And in the most recent update of this same roadmap, IAEA states that we have the tools needed to go much, much faster. The energy sector is changing faster than many people think, but much more needs to be done, and time is very, very short. Momentum is coming, not just from the push to meet climate targets, but also from the increasingly strong economic case for clean energy, energy security imperatives, and the jobs and industrial opportunities that accompany the new energy economy. And yet, momentum must be accelerated to be in line with the 1.5 degrees goal and to ensure that the process of change works for everyone. Above all, this needs to be a unified effort in which governments put tensions aside and find ways to work together on what is the defining challenge of our time.
Ramping up renewables, improving energy efficiency, cutting methane emissions, and increasing electrification with technologies available today deliver more than 80% of the emission reductions needed by 2030. Therefore, it is not a matter of technology to reach our climate targets and limit global warming. It is only a matter of the choices you make. Swiftly increasing clean energy investments in developing countries is also extremely vital. This requires collaboration, meaningful technology and innovation transfer, and especially solidarity among developed countries to help finance these investments.
In addition to mitigation and adaptation, we believe that we have a growing need to research and discuss climate repair technologies, such as removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or solar geoengineering. Because even if we can meet the 2050 net zero targets, without climate interventions, there will be irreversible damage, such as the globally devastating loss of Arctic sea ice. Reaching such tipping points will trigger unpredictable and disastrous chain reactions.
Thus, prompt action is needed to, firstly, research and develop climate repair techniques to capture and store carbon, cool and stabilize ecosystems, and secondly, to govern a climate repair agenda internationally. And we want to highlight that all of this must be achieved without taking the foot off the pedal on mitigation adaptation to the accelerating changes even 1 single inch.
Now then, how to achieve all of this? Indeed, as discussed, we already have all of the necessary tools to combat climate change. We have the awareness, we have the technology, we have the markets, we have the science. The only thing missing here is political will and ambition. And that is why stopping climate change is both possible as well as realistic. As part of an equitable pathway to the global goal of net zero emissions by 2050, almost all countries need to bring forward their targeted net zero dates. And we already see this happening, with ambitious net zero targets written down in domestic law, such as Maldives with the goal of 2030 and Finland with the goal of 2035. If these countries will do it, why wouldn't you?
There is progress, that is undeniable. However, the single biggest question remains whether the inevitable change will happen fast enough before the effects of climate change reach even greater, massive, and irreversible destruction. The kind of destruction we already see happening today, with devastating human and economical loss all across the globe. Finding political will, despite the challenges, is still easier than, for example, overhauling the economic system, making scientific breakthroughs, or developing new technologies from scratch. Thus, we tell you that this necessary transition is not only a problem, but an opportunity to foster meaningful and transformative change. As European youth, we strongly believe in our collective capacity to achieve a sustainable, just transition that benefits all, given political will only choose to do so.
However, the present discourse and reality does not reflect this potential in the transition. In its current form, climate change is a problem of multidimensional, systematic injustice. Children and young people who are not to blame for climate change will have to live the longest with the consequences. This particularly applies to children and young people in climate-vulnerable developing countries. All countries must recognize and show with action that we take our historical responsibility seriously.
Climate finance must be arranged so that it effectively reaches and supports groups on the ground in particularly vulnerable situations, such as women, indigenous peoples, children, and people with disabilities. To fully realize this, the European Youth demands that we get real and meaningful participation in all climate discussions and negotiations. This means that our expertise and know-how is respected and included, and that arrangements are made for open dialogue before, during, and after the negotiations. This is something we urge each of you to take home with you and implement in the accelerating COP28 process in your respective countries and organizations.
On this note, we would like to express our gratitude to IAEA and the Spanish government for setting precedents by actively highlighting youth voices with making time for us to speak here today. To conclude this speech, the European youth demands each person in this room to take responsibility for accelerating progress and realizing the potential in processes and programs that take place at COP28. The time for pretty words, pretentious speeches, and petty fighting is over as we head towards full-scale ecosystem collapse.
Today, the global youth looks up to you and expects constructive, effective action, taking full advantage of the potential that lies with a swift and just energy transition. As the youth, we demand for you not just to listen to us, but to partner with us on delivering that action. For the sake of our future, for the sake of your own children's future, and all the generations to come, all of us, and in particular future generations, will remember with gratitude those who act upon the urgency of now.
We're counting on you to deliver.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So very many thanks to our colleagues for this impressive duet, if I may say so, wonderfully delivered. Thank you very much. Now, may I ask our co-chair, the Vice President, Teresa Ribera, to wrap up this discussion and also continue with the rest of the session. Over to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Fatih, and thanks to you all, because I think that the overview is quite an interesting set of issues that you have raised in this preliminary conversation. So I think that it is worth it to ensure that we have at least half an hour to exchange views with some of the ministers around the table. But allow me to underline some of the messages that I consider that could be, I would say, quite supported by all your interventions. First, the comment on please be consistent. Be consistent with what it has already been agreed in 2015. Be consistent then with the signals that we provide in the COP in Dubai. So what about the fossil fuels? That's something that comes up from all of you. So with different perspectives, different views, but I think that Maria stated in a very nice manner, hey, this is the source of the problem, how we can handle that and how we can introduce this reference to the need to get rid of fossil fuels and how we can do that while ensuring at the same time that there are alternatives that can provide affordable and sustainable energy for all. So the question is whether there has to be a strong signal on new fossil fuels that should not be acceptable and stay in the ground, as it has been said by the NGOs and the science for a very long while. How we can accommodate the transformation of the existing ones. How we can facilitate a consistent framework in terms of global goals that seems to be supported by all when talking about energy efficiency, when talking about renewable energy, or when talking about ensuring that there is a proper transformation of the finance that can provide the right solutions. Ensuring the finance is, of course, something which is very important for all. There are reference to the finance for a very long while already that has been enriched along the years. So what about the subsidies to fossil fuels? What about the role of the multilateral and national development banks? What about the institutional framework for the international finance? What about new and innovative sources of finance to ensure that we can ensure that we do not increase the problem, but we allocate the funding to solve the problems while ensuring a proper development by every single society. I think that this is why it is also important, the comments that you made on inclusiveness, ensuring not only that the loss and damage can go forward, but that the decisions, the provisions do take into consideration the expectations of the different regions of the world, how to ensure access to energy, how to ensure access to finance, how to ensure that we do not only count on net zero emissions, but what we could say net zero poverty, how we can ensure that things do provide solutions in this context. There have been some additional comments very interesting on transparency and accountability. So something that deserves trust, confidence, needs to provide the tools to be sure that what we say we do, it is really being done by all. And there have been some very interesting comments. We don't need heroes. We need things being transformed. And this demands a cooperative approach on technology innovations, on approaches for development and on solidarity. So I think that this goes very much along the lines that have been introduced by you all, but I'm sure that there may be questions and it changes in this conversation, in this first session, that it is open to the different constituencies being represented in this room, to avoid fragmentation, but at the same time to ensure consistent pathways coming from each of us towards something that should be facilitated by the institutional action, but that does require commitment from every single private player in this world. So if it is okay with you all, I have some ministers that have already signaled that they could be very happy to make some comments or question marks to you, starting by our Commissioner, Kadri Simpson, the Commissioner in charge of energy in the European Union. So, Kadri, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everybody, and thank you also for inviting us all here. It was a very impressive first panel, so my thanks are going also to all the speakers. And as Teresa mentioned, I'm responsible for EU energy policy. And I heard your request that setting in place clear regulation and making sure that new future-proof investments will also return some safe revenues, we can even further accelerate the green transition. And this is exactly what we are doing at EU level. So by setting ambitions under the European Green Deal, European Union aligned its energy and climate policies with Paris Agreement. And just some facts: last year, 2022, more renewables than ever before were rolled out in European 27 member states, and we made efficiency gains 8%. This is an unprecedented amount. So last year, 40 gigawatts of new solar and 19 gigawatts of wind were installed, and we already know that this year will be even more impressive. Europe is really experiencing a true renewable energy revolution, and it gives us a confidence to believe that getting back on track with 1.5 degrees is possible. Altogether, we must massively invest in the deployment of the technologies of today and, at the same time, develop the technologies of tomorrow. So we continue to invest into research and innovation, and we have to scale up also the new clean technologies. We all know that this April, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, proposed at the Major Economies Forum on Energy and Climate that we need to triple the world's renewable energy installed capacity to 11 terawatts, so by 2030. And also, we might still keep 1.5 degrees in reach if we also double the rate of energy efficiency improvements. Without energy efficiency, it will be impossible. We know that this is very ambitious, but it is achievable. So we must remove barriers and create the right incentives for renewables and energy efficiency. We must unlock public and private funding, especially in developing countries for whom the high cost of capital makes clean energy more expensive. And we must upgrade our infrastructure. So we must bring also our manufacturing industry and our workforce at scale, and we must create resilient value change. This is what the European Commission is prioritizing also here in Europe, and together with COP28 presidency, we are proposing to put all these objectives together into a single pledge to be launched at COP28. There have been many useful discussions at the margins of UN General Assembly and UN Climate Week, and we know that there is a strong interest on the topic, both from civil society, but also a critical mass of countries have flagged their interest, and I truly hope that this pledge at COP28 will bring us back on the track. Thank you.
Thank you, Kadri. And now I would like to go to Africa and to invite Mr. Kabi to make some comments or some considerations or question marks, as you prefer, to our colleagues.
Thank you very much. And first of all is to thank the government of Spain and IAEA for inviting us to participate in this forum. A month ago, Kenya hosted the Africa Climate Summit, which was attended by the heads of state, the global leaders, international and regional organizations, private sector, civil society, children, women, youth, indigenous people. Indeed, everyone was there. And the goal was to be able to look at how we respond to the issue of climate change and how we can have a unified position moving forward. The leaders who are there committed to develop and implement policies, regulations, and incentives aimed at attracting local, regional, and global investment in green growth and inclusive economies. They also looked at focusing economic development plans on climate, including positive growth, including also expansion of just energy transitions and renewable energy generation. They committed to strengthen continental collaboration and advance green industrialization. But the leaders also saw that it is not enough. They called for more action, especially in full implementation of the Paris Agreement. They focused their call on scale, on urgency, and inclusivity. Specifically, the leaders called upon the other world leaders to appreciate that decarbonizing the global economy is also an opportunity to contribute to equality and shared prosperity. They also made a call to align and coordinate technical and financial resources directed towards Africa to promote sustainable utilization of Africa's natural assets for the continent's progression towards low-carbon development and contributing to global decarbonization. While noting that the scale of financing required to unlock Africa's climate-positive growth is beyond the borrowing capacity of national balance sheets or at the risk premium that Africa is currently paying for private capital, The leaders called for acceleration of the ongoing initiatives to reform the multilateral financial system and global financial architecture. Indeed, there was a call to establish a new financing architecture that is responsive to Africa's need, including the development of a new global climate finance charter. This then is the rallying call, and the leaders did mandate our President, William Ruto, as the head, the chair of the Heads of State Committee on Climate and the AU, to pursue these issues during the COP28. Africa is committed to play its part in terms of ensuring a safer place, a safer world, and meeting our climate goals. And we call upon all the international community to lend support to what has been agreed in Nairobi so that we can be able to see movement in this part. Thank you very much.
I think that it was quite a strong meeting that you held in Nairobi a couple of weeks ago, and I think that that strengthens a lot the capacity and the positive expectations out of the COP. I think that this was quite a helpful opportunity to see what are the expectations coming from Africa and the commitment, the engagement of the leaders, the African leaders, very much in particular your president. So thanks a lot for your comments. I could certainly like to turn back to the African Union to complement these references with this African perspective. So please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Excellency, and allow me at the outset to thank you and your team, your country, for the very warm welcome and for the excellent visit yesterday, and congratulate you again on this beautiful, beautiful gallery we visited yesterday. And my thanks also go to my dear brother, Executive Director of the IAEA, for fantastic work that you have been carrying out, not just for the IAEA, I think for the globe. And your meetings, I can see that a coalition has formed. I look around the table, but friends, I mean, that we are coming together every time. Excellencies, let me just point out, again, Africa is front and center when it comes to climate. And no one can even afford to ignore Africa if we are really serious about climate. Africa is not only going to be the fourth of the humanity, so investing in Africa is investing in humanity, since it would be the fourth of the humanity by 2050, but also we are the region that is mostly endowed with sources of renewable energy, and also the 70 to 80% of the minerals that are needed for the energy storage. So again, if we are serious about climate issues or need to resolve the energy crisis, then Africa is key. However, and paradoxically, Africa is also where energy has been a crisis for a very long time. More than half of our population do not have access to electricity. 90% of our population do not have access to clean cooking. So forgive me if our narrative is different from what is being said here. We're not talking about transition. We're talking about basic rights, about universal access to electricity and to clean cooking. And we are calling for solidarities, for real and renewed partnerships and deliverables and actions, not only in COPs, but in the 11.5 months throughout the year, that we are seeing, from COP to COP, and not just speeches in COPs. And the way to do that, one, and has been mentioned several times, is affordable finance. And we cannot continue with the current financial instruments that exist. They do not allow us to honor the commitments of tripling or renewable energy, or any energy actually, or doubling the efficiency. We need to look at the chain, the whole value chain of energy end to end. So not just the generation, but also all the infrastructure needed to go all the way to the last mile. We need also the enablers such as digitalization. I'm happy that Africa is the region that is digitalizing the fastest. We also need to look at transport, things like railways, mass transportation in cities, not cars. We are not talking about cars in Africa, but you know, the mass transportation in the form of cleaner urban transportation, and as well as railways. And most and foremost, we need the capacity building and the technology transfer. Remember, it's we can very much be the region that helps with the supply chain and the diversification due to the availability of labor, the resources, and the closeness, to the all international markets. And Africa is very well positioned to be the supply chain for an important critical part of the supply chain worldwide for cleaner energy, but also all the, the products, the new products such as, green hydrogen, and the industries built on this green energy. And here I refer again to a fantastic report by the IAEA on the green industry and the green strategies, which are opening new ways of seeing things in the world. Excellencies, as we said always, we need the actions, not the speeches. We can turn this crisis into the biggest development projects of all times. A crisis is a blessing in disguise. There are tremendous opportunities for businesses, and they are all linked one way or the other, and actually in many ways, to Africa. So investing in Africa is investing in your future and also in your present. So let me just conclude by repeating the motto that we had all said during COVID. We are not safe until and unless we are all safe. We are in this together. So let's have the discourse, the narrative, and the actions cater for all of us, especially the developing world, and especially for Africa. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Amani. Now I have in my list Espen Barth from Norway.
Gracias, Teresa, and thank you so much for convening us. I think this is a uniquely good gathering at the very right time as we move towards COP28. And I must say to my good friend Fatih that this is an excellent report. I think all of us need to read the whole thing because there are many interrelationships between what's said here. Don't just fall in love with one sentence. It's the complexity and the totality of what is said, which really is the message that we can build on. And it fills me with optimism. I think we all know it's incredibly hard. We will have a very tough time as we move into and during COP. But it also reminds us that it can be done, and that actually on some fronts things are looking better than they did even 2 years ago. And when I read about the technologies that are a little later, I was saying, well, we can fix that. This is what we should look into and accelerate because it can be done. It's just the speed that hasn't been where you and we expected a couple of years ago. So that's good. And I also would like to echo what I heard from our African friends from Kenya and the African Union. It was a really successful meeting that you had in Nairobi, and I strongly commend the government of President Ruto and everyone who contributed to that, full of optimism and full of recognition of the role that Africa can play. And if I might say before I begin saying what I really want to say is I really hope that Africa sees itself not only as the energy provider, but also produce the products that clean energy produces, because that's a good way for clean green growth, and it is also the way to avoid the lock-in if developing countries remain fossil. As the industrial economies move away from fossil industry, there is a real risk of meeting markets that are less welcoming of the product. So that's really an important message. But for COP28, we started only at COP26 really to talk about fossils, particularly on coal. It did not go as far as some of us hoped, but it was a start. We did not get much traction in Sharm el-Sheikh, but I think this time we are really organized ourselves for speaking about what is really the elephant in the room, what was the elephant of the room, which is now out in the light, which is to discuss about the energy transition, which is from something to something. And I will be the first one to say I support the tripling and the doubling, so the tripling of clean energy production and the doubling of efficiency, because the efficiency part is an essential part of Fatih's message to us. It's not only more, it's also smarter use. Of course, electrification in some cases is in itself more effective, because as we all know, an electric car is, 3 to 4 times more effective in the use of primary energy than a fossil car. So some of it come together, but we also need to deal with that. But it's not enough. And we have to be frank about what we need more of is not enough, because the world has a colossal thirst for energy and can, in principle, use all the energy that will be produced. So if we are not careful, we will have an energy addition towards clean without an energy transition. An energy transition is something has to go down for other things to come up. But you also need the new energy sources, and also, as importantly, the new uses of energy to be up before actually you effectively get rid of the old. So that is the totality here. I think that means that we need to discuss that as a goal, but we also, as Lawrence very correctly said, we need to go into the details now. We are now at the mature, and this is the NGO communities, the business communities, governments. This is a time for an ambitious and mature discussion on the details, because just setting goals is not good enough for any of us. I mean, it's really about how do you achieve these goals, which I think is incredibly important. We need to talk about carbon pricing. It has to be more costly to remain fossil. We need to talk about all aspects of regulatory change, which means it will be more attractive to be renewable, or at least emission-free rather than fossil. And we need to talk about support for technological development, for the development itself, but also for the transfer of technology to emerging economies and developing countries. And there's good news and bad news for developing countries. The good news is that the new energies are generally cheaper than the old. So you're actually replacing expensive fossil energy with less expensive renewable energy. The bad news is that it doesn't just happen. You need to invest, you need an upfront investment, and here comes the cost of capital, technology transfer, and the need for more advanced regulatory regimes. Because burning coal is very easy. To have a stable, complex electricity system is cheaper when you have it, but more complex. It requires sort of not only money, but also organizational change. I very much agree with the business community's strong message that signals are helpful for business. It's good for investors to know what the world will look like. And my sense is that investors, CEOs, innovators in business want clearer messages that we tend to come up with, because they can do it, but they need to know what to do, right? Which direction to move, which direction to develop. And then we need to also read thoroughly what is said here. We need the future energy system needs electrons wherever you can use them, because electrification is normally the best thing you can do, but we need a lot of molecules, and they have to be clean. So they have to be produced somewhere. And here, I heard from our dear friends in the civil society, they said they would hold us to account. You should, I think you do, and you should. But you were also ready to help. And then I have a suggestion for where you can help, because if you read the whole book, we need a colossal build-out of renewable energy. The downside with that, it requires a lot of space, because fossil fuels was space 100 million years ago. Now we just take it out of the ground. But in order to have hydro, photovoltaic, and wind, it requires space. And there, many of the same friends from the same NGOs tend to say we don't want renewable energy here. Sometimes they're right, by the way, but sometimes they're wrong. So we need sort of an honest discussion that you can't fix this without taking some more nature. And this is a real dilemma that we're all dealing with, because we also want to deliver on the nature agreement, or the CBD from Montreal. The other thing it says is that you need a colossal amount of minerals and metals and rare earths, because otherwise we will not be able to build the windmills or the photovoltaics or the electric cars with the batteries. So that's also a part of the message. So if those of us who like the phase-out language and also has to understand it's related to more mining. Of course, more circular use, but you need more mining and you need more space for all the photovoltaics. And this is what I refer to as a mature conversation for all of us. Last point, and I've spoken too long, abatement. There is two risks when in the abatement discussion. One, of course, is that you say abatement and continue as before. You just, abate, CCS on everything, and then you do as before. Not true, will not work, not enough space, wrong. And unhelpful, because you actually should take out all the emissions in the first place where you can. But to say that abatement is greenwashing and unhelpful is also wrong. And here I agree with Fatih and the report and with the IPCC, said there is no way to 1.5 without CCS. And CCS works. I think what we need to do as we together, and this group is a good group to start, when we say phase out of unabated fossil fuels, let's define where we think abatement is a good idea and where we think abatement is wrong. And that's also part of this mature discussion, which we should have now, because finally we are there, where so many people wanted to come to a place where we will discuss the full complexity of energy transition at the COP. First time, let's use this opportunity as good as we can and recognize the intrinsic internal dilemmas that it comes with, and which came very well out in Fatih's excellent report. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much. I have two more people that have asked for the floor, and then I will ask the representative of the incoming presidency, the Special Envoy Magnet, to make the final comments. But before him, I have in my list Lilian from Brazil.
Good morning, everyone. I'll begin by thanking Teresa and the government of Spain for organizing this meeting. It's really a critical time in our pathway to the next COP. So I couldn't agree more with some comments from the civil society that we have the opportunity to keep the momentum going, not only on this COP, but within the next years. And Brazil wants to be part of the solution. That's why we will, as a developing country, preside over G20 meetings next year, where we are committed to keep the momentum, and we intend to focus on the financial side of the equation, on how to unleash the kind of financial sources that we need to finance this transition. Also, it's true that what the IPCC and science is telling us, that these next 10 years, they are critical to the future. So you are very right in keeping the pressure, in organizing yourselves to push governments. But I think that it is very important, and I congratulate Spain for inviting you, because societies are part of the deal. It's not only you governments doing what has to be done. Governments will react to their constituencies. Their constituencies will tell them the pace of the changes, because for some countries, the change will be costly. It's a very hard choices. Now, the world is based on an energy system that runs on fossil fuels. To change that will take a well-crafted planning. Otherwise, we will put ourselves in a big energy crisis. And no government will sign up for an energy crisis. So my second point is something that the European Climate Foundation representative said. Not only targets, strategy on how to get there. This will be essential to allow some results at the COP and in the next years as well. As you all know, the legal international pact to fight climate change is based on some pillars: reduce emissions, adapt, and implement. I think that developing countries want emphasis on the implementation side. And as we are getting to the global stocktake exercise, and the Minister of Denmark is one of our facilitators, he's doing a great job, you see that many countries, they need focus on means of implementation. Means of implementation in climate legal talk means transfer of technology, capacity building, and finance. So if we don't face these three details, I'm afraid we will be frustrated in Dubai and in 2024, and hopefully not in 2025, where Brazil wants to host you all to a COP in the middle of the Amazon. So this is very, very important, put some focus on implementation. We would like that the next climate meeting would be about implementation. We have the technology, we have the pathways, we have the international agencies helping us to understand how to get there and how to get there faster. So we need to get down and get the job done. So regarding the long list of targets for the next COP or for our transition, Mr. Biro had in 4th place clean energy financing in developing countries. I think this should be put up in the ladder so we can start talking. This is a real problem, and I will go to some data from IRENA, the International Agency for Renewables. There is a growing inequality in investment and deployment of clean energy in the world. Nearly all the growth in investment is concentrated in developing economies, especially United States, Europe, and Australia, and not much has happened in the developing countries since 2015. So we have to be realistic. We have to find ways to tackle the challenges. Otherwise, we will be stick to the speeches and targets and no implementation. So, and also it's unfair that the renewables revolution will would widen the social economic gap within the world and not bridging it. The whole fight against climate change should not be done in the expense of social economic development. And lastly, it's really interesting what the journalist from Bloomberg mentioned. Developing countries want a say in issues that affect them. That is one of the tensions that the climate regime has to address. My country is trying to advance a negotiating group that is Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, that accounts for almost half of the world's population. So what these countries have in their plate, it's a lot. It's a lot of people who have to have access to clean energy, but have to have access to energy at all at accessible price. So these geopolitical challenges that should be addressed as well. And so maybe we'll need some change in world governance in order to advance as a group. And anyhow, thank you for your comments. I will give my email. I want to receive written comments from all the presentations. And we will be ready to advance in all these targets in the next COP and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Leonore from Austria.
Thanks a lot. For the spirit of, for the sake of time, I cut out the thanks, but one. Thanks to Kenya for hosting the Africa Summit. I think this was really a crucial milestone on our way to this year's COP. Much has been said, the debate has been very rich, so I will focus on 3 points and one question, one ask to all of you who came here today also to give us your input. First, and I think whether we talk about transformation, as we do in Austria, whether we talk about access to affordable energy and the basic right to energy and to access to energy, I think we would all probably agree around this table, this is no easy task. This is a challenge at every seat around this table. So I think, and it's probably a challenge even more so because, as Espen said, we're not only more talking about the ambitious goals. We've set them. We set them in the Paris Agreement, we've set them nationally, but because we precisely talk about very real, very concrete change. That means something for business, that means something for business models, that means something for who profits and who will need to change. So that's probably why this debate becomes even trickier. And then in challenging times with multiple crises, and also Fatih has pointed to that, of course it doesn't get any easier. So for me it was really encouraging in all of this when we listened to the debate last week, in the UK, that it was industry coming out saying they need 3 things from us. They need ambition, they need commitment, and they need consistency. And this is our job around this table, to deliver exactly that, even in times when we have the feeling we have faced growing oppositions or the questions become tougher. It's very logical that at this point in time of our development, the questions become tougher. And that's my number 1 point. I think this is really our ambition now, to stay course, to keep the spirit alive and to get it on the ground. The second point is, I think, in terms of, and it has been said several times around the table, consistency means we have to, at the one hand side, look at the root causes. So fossil fuels cannot no longer be the elephant in the room, but must be on the table. And the second thing is, of course, the discussion on finance, that that I think also here we need to tackle it in the full spectrum. So aligning financial flows, public and private, must be a debate on the table, because otherwise we will, given the strains we all face, we will not manage to leverage the amounts of finance we need for this transformation. So, and that includes, of course, the affordability, the de-risking, the multilateral financial institutions, but really the consistency in terms of aligning the financial flows will be key. The third point is the question on because I think also Fatih mentioned that in the first round, the feeling of people being left behind. And I think this is also what you alluded to. We get questions from our constituencies, of course. So I think we really need to deliver that also nationally, and not just talk about just transition, but also fill it with life. And of course, I'm now talking from an Austrian perspective. Excuse me for that, but the shortage of skilled workers is a crucial topic that we face in our country. So there is, and I need to change for my 2040 goal, I need every 3 minutes a new PV installation. I need 100 gas and oil boilers exchanged every day. So I have a lot of work. So my job is to get the people from the side of the fossil fuel industry to they know how to drill. They can drill for geothermal. Huh? So we need to reskill, and we really need to focus on that, because that's also a positive perspective and a positive narrative for the people in our societies. And the third, and the ask to all of us, I think what we're facing, and there I add another thanks then to the IAEA. What we're facing at the moment is the challenge to keep the climate discourse in a positive spirit, as a positive way forward, as a positive vision for our societies. And if you look at the debate and how it's going in some of our regions, some of our countries, it's not always encouraging, let's put it like that. I see some nods around the table, so I think many of us can relate to that. So there we also need you. We also need you to help us shape the discourse, because as much as we feel the ask for ambitious climate policy and ambitious way forward around the world, the easier it will be for us to deliver. And I really want to thank at this point for the IAEA for this report, because what you're doing in shaping the discourse is crucial. You're saying we've underestimated what we can do consistently, also from an IAEA perspective. Yeah? We underestimated what the world was able to deliver. I mean, that's an extremely positive message. The rapid development of technology is incredible. And this is disruptive technology, whether we want it or not. Yeah, it's simply cheapest, better. It's the better car and it's the cheaper electricity. And I think this is, I think we really need to work on that together, because this will be a crucial tipping point also in our public debates, I think. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot. I think that it is quite interesting what we've heard. It is emotions, it's shaping opportunities, it's lots of homework back to the civil society, it's expectations and looking at governments on what we do. It is access to energy, green finance, and the risk in investments. It's ensuring that there is a share in the benefits of this transformation in every single corner, country of the world. And sometimes the scale of the transformation may be different. So we've heard different views from Europe and Africa, insisting on the opportunities. And we have heard, and this is how I would like to end before inviting Majid to make some comments as the one being in charge of facilitating our job in the COP. I think that both Espen and no, the three of them, Espen, Leonore, and Lilian, did also point out some concrete references to the civil society. Espen was quite vocal when saying, hey, there are some tricky issues that in a mature conversation we also need to deal with. What about the preparatory work to take decisions on what use we make out of the ground if we are going to develop renewable energy solutions and it is intense in the use of soil, if we are going to require new materials and it means mining, or what about abatement and in which conditions we are discussing or we are not discussing about the abatement of the emissions of some energy uses that we already counting on for a while. Lilian was also insisting on the fact that the social dimension is very important when trying to tackle these issues and how we can ensure that people do not feel left behind and that people do benefit from this transformation. Knowing that the challenge should not be responding in a way that we widen the difference between those benefiting from the current development state and those that could have to face a different financial cost in terms of the developing of new solutions. So not to get trapped in what we want to get rid of, but how we can go in a smooth manner towards the pathways and the action, and not only the targets and the goals. And a similar approach was underlined by Leonore. I think that this is also very interesting, how we can ensure that the way we act is being perceived as a positive way, and there is a willingness to do more and more instead of listing the difficulties to make this transformation happen. And once said that, Fatih, if you agree, we could ask Majid to let us know how he reads things.
I always agree with you, Teresa.
Good.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to everybody for the comments and inputs, especially to you, Minister Teresa, for hosting us, and for Your Excellency Fatih for having us in this very important conversation. I unfortunately have to read you notes because as a COP presidency, we try to reflect everybody's views, and the team doesn't like me to go rogue. Maybe I will afterwards. But I think the message is one that is clear. It's really a critical juncture in the climate history, and COP28, as our COP president mentioned, is only 59 days away, and we've made great progress, but there's still a lot for us to do. This is our chance to rewrite history and to ensure we are true to the commitments of the Paris Agreement. The global stocktake has told us that what we already know: the world is not on track to meet the central goal of the Paris Agreement and keep 1.5 degrees C within reach. The window is quickly closing, and before it slams shut, we need an urgent course correction. That is why our presidency is calling for a COP of action. Without action, our opportunity to reset will disappear. A world with a global temperature rise over 1.5 degrees C is unimaginable. Studies show that extreme weather, one of the manifestations of climate change, already causes 5 million deaths a year. Rising global temperatures, sea level rise, and extreme climatic events will increase with every fraction of a degree. When leaders arrive in Dubai at the end of November, we need to be laser focused on how we can ensure this opportunity is not missed. The future of our planet depends on it. And in Paris, global leaders agreed on the problem. In Dubai, we need to agree and act on the solutions. To this end, the COP28 presidency has developed a 4-point action plan to ensure that we don't lose sight of our 1.5 degrees C goal. This plan commits to fast-tracking an equitable and orderly energy transition, fixing climate finance, focusing on people, lives and livelihoods, and underpinning everything with full inclusivity. We have provided a practical roadmap that will help us build the energy system of tomorrow, something that I've heard from around the table today, free from all unabated fossil fuels, while we decarbonize the energy system we have today. We need to have those practical conversations, just as was mentioned by many of our colleagues. As highlighted by the IAEA's Net Zero Roadmap published this week, we know that we have the tools needed to meet the 1.5 degrees C target, but we must accelerate our efforts and collaboration and focus on priority actions within this decade. The first step on this path is tripling renewable energy capacity to at least 11 gigawatts and doubling annual energy efficiency improvements by 2030. The power sector accounts for around 35% of global emissions, and cutting these emissions is crucial to keeping 1.5 degrees C on track. We need informed policies that jumpstart the clean hydrogen value chain and commercialize carbon capture in heavy emitting sectors of cement, steel, and aluminium sectors. And we need nuclear power, significant expansion to infrastructure networks, improved battery storage, and we need new technologies. We need all of this at scale, and we need it quickly. We're all calling on IOCs and NOCs to zero out methane emissions by 2030, to align around net zero by or before 2050, and commit significant capital investment to clean energies. This must happen, and it must be underpinned by transparency and accountability. We are not dreamers. We know to make this happen will require greater collaboration and serious capital. We will need between $4 to $5 trillion annually in accessible, available, and affordable financing. It's not a problem of capital, it's a problem of allocation. It's our job as custodians of COP28 to make sure that it gets to the right places. We need to bring the financial system into the 21st century. We need a complete overhaul of our international financial institutions and multilateral development banks. These were designed for the last century, and our needs are now different. The Global South has been waiting 14 years for the 100 billion promise. This must be delivered this year. There can be no more excuses because there isn't time, frankly. There are 7 years to 2030. As well as being a COP of action, we're a COP of inclusivity. This is a global problem that requires a global solution. We can't afford to leave anyone behind. We understand without inclusion of civil society, women, NGOs, youth groups, indigenous peoples, and others, our action plan won't succeed. Inclusion, in this case, is a win-win for everybody. Renewable energy, one of the pillars of our action plan, not only benefits the environment, but according to the UNDP, it brings with it significant social, economic, health, and national security benefits. In closing, I want to say that we have an opportunity that can't be missed. COP28 will be a pivotal moment for us, and it's important that we unite, we act, and we deliver results, an equitable systems transformation, the one that we so urgently need. For that to happen, we need your support to send a clear signal to the global community and to drive this agenda forward. And I look forward to seeing all of you in the UAE because, as I mentioned, I would go a little bit rogue off of the thing. What I've heard today is a lot of passion and energy, but we need to transform that into practical solutions. What we are saying is, as a COP presidency, is that at COP28, we are providing the platform, we're providing the opportunity, we're convening the conversations, we're bringing everybody together to discuss the hard questions, and we're asking those hard questions. But we can't do this without your support. And when we say your support, we mean the support of the parties to deliver the outcomes that we need in the negotiations, but also the support of civil society, of business, of NGOs, to come with the commitments and the actions that they're going to announce at COP28. And I say that, I want to repeat that. We don't need you to come to have the conversation at COP28. We need you to have the conversations now in important meetings like this one today, to find those solutions today, so that when you come to COP28, you're telling the world, you're telling our young people what you're actually going to do about the challenge, because I'll repeat, we have 7 years to 2030. And any major plan or project or policy that is going to make a difference, we all know takes about 3 to 5 years to work. That means it has to be decided now, and we don't have the time. So please join us, be part of COP28, help us to make this the most significant COP. And I thank you and sorry for taking more time than needed. Thank you very much.
So we have 15 minutes for coffee and for this. And I would like to thank all the special guests that have been sharing their views and their conclusions after the meetings they held last week and the conversations with their own constituencies. Thank you.